Keep your formation. Hold the line.
Imagine a massive army of 50,000 fierce Roman legionnaires marching across enemy territory. These men are ready to crush any opponent, conquer new lands, and bring glory to the great city of Rome. It sounds like the beginning of an epic historical film with loud music and gleaming armor. But behind the scenes, Hollywood usually leaves out the most important and dirtiest problem of any war. If you have 50,000 men, they produce tons of human waste every day. And if you do nothing about it, your great army will perish before it even meets the enemy. Toilet logistics was a matter of basic physical survival, not just military comfort. Epidemics of dysentery and cholera killed ancient legions much faster than the sharpest barbarian swords. Roman generals realized this unpleasant but absolutely undeniable biological fact quite quickly. That is precisely why they turned the management of human waste into a strict military science. It sounds a bit funny, but it was Roman sanitary discipline that helped them win years-long campaigns. Today we will examine a system that is not covered in school textbooks, but without which the Roman Empire would simply have drowned in its own filth. Most people think that the main danger in ancient warfare was spears and arrows. But here's a historical fact. Dozens of times more soldiers died from disease than in battle. When a huge crowd of people gathers in one place, a real bacteriological nightmare begins. Without proper sanitation, water quickly becomes contaminated, and flies carry the infection right into the field kitchens. A single outbreak of intestinal infection was enough to wipe out an entire legion. The Romans didn't know about the existence of bacteria, but they clearly saw the cause and effect relationship. Gather 50,000 people in a field camp, and you'll have a full-blown ecological disaster. Every day, this massive army produced a huge amount of waste that didn't just disappear on its own. Horses, mules, and draft oxen also made a significant contribution to the pollution of the surrounding area. All this organic matter, under the scorching summer sun, instantly became an ideal breeding ground for parasites. The ancient world was completely defenseless against invisible threats due to the lack of antibiotics and modern medicine. For the Greeks and many other ancient peoples, dealing with this was quite simple and incredibly chaotic. They often solved this pressing problem with a simple trip to the nearest bushes or a nearby dark forest. If you're setting up a temporary camp for a couple of days, you can somehow get by without serious consequences. Nature has time to process a small amount of waste before it reaches drinking water sources. But grueling Roman campaigns lasted for months on end in the same isolated location. Such a carefree approach would have guaranteed mass deaths from simple dysentery. Imagine you're a commander, and half your soldiers can't even stand on their feet. They don't have the strength to hold a shield, let alone swing a heavy sword. Dehydration and high fever turned mighty veterans into completely helpless and weak men. Your fearsome army turns into a massive open-air hospital, meekly awaiting the finishing blow. The stench in such a camp was so terrible that it was impossible to even approach it safely. In such a situation, the barbarians didn't even need to attack your well-fortified defensive positions. All they had to do was wait a little while on the sidelines, conserving their strength for the final blow. Nature would do all the dirty work for them, destroying the enemy without a single shot or swing of an axe. Roman commanders fully understood this critical vulnerability and were absolutely unwilling to risk their valuable soldiers. The experience of past bitter defeats taught them to pay attention to the invisible details of the hardships of military life. Therefore, they decided to enforce iron discipline where other nations recklessly relied on chance. This is where the most interesting and, in its own way, ingenious aspect of the Roman military approach to warfare begins. They equated the proper digging of latrines with a tactical maneuver as important as forming the famous tortoise formation. No soldier could simply walk behind the nearest tree to quickly relieve himself. All routine movements throughout the vast camp were strictly regulated by the harsh rules of military discipline. Violating sanitary regulations could easily result in a severe beating with a heavy wooden stick on the back from a stern centurion. To a modern person, the punishment for venturing into the bushes without permission seems excessively cruel and completely disproportionate. But the stakes in this invisible war for survival were too high for the entire army of many thousands. A single lazy or foolish recruit could have triggered a horrific epidemic that would have wiped out half the camp. A dangerous infection spread among soldiers living in close quarters in tents at a terrifying and uncontrollable rate. Therefore, corporal punishment was considered an absolutely justified measure to prevent serious mass diseases. To better understand the scale of the problem, let's use a very simple and vivid modern analogy. Imagine a huge open-air music festival where all the portable toilets were suddenly removed. Now add to that the sweltering summer heat, a complete lack of sanitizers, and the need to live there for several months. My legs start to buckle just from the thought of the stench and total unsanitary conditions in such a dreadful place. The Roman legions faced this deadly threat every time they set out on a long military campaign, and their solution was the strict militarized standardization of absolutely all daily processes in the field camp. The Roman army was not just a collection of armed warriors. It functioned as a complex engineering machine. Every legionnaire was trained not only to kill enemies with technical skill, but also to dig hard ground professionally. A heavy shovel and pickaxe were just as vital for survival as the famous short Roman gladius sword. Soldiers carried bulky tools for earthwork alongside their metal armor and provisions. Their full marching gear weighed dozens of kilograms, turning every day's march into a true test of endurance. Modern elite special forces also carry an incredible amount of various tactical gear and weapons, but they hardly ever have to build a full-fledged drainage and sewage system for themselves by hand every day. For a Roman legionary, however, this was an absolutely routine, albeit unbearably exhausting, evening task. After a long day's march, their first priority was not the long-awaited dinner, but their entrenching tools. But why didn't other ancient armies come up with such a well-organized system for survival in the field? The answer lies in the state's attitude toward the common soldier and the cost of his years of military training. Training a true Roman legionary cost the treasury a colossal sum and took long, grueling months of training. These were true professional soldiers who received a regular silver salary and a guarantee of land upon retirement. Losing such an expensive military specialist due to a simple bout of diarrhea was an absolutely unacceptable economic waste. Barbarian tribes could easily and quickly gather a new crowd to replace their tribesmen who had died of disease. For them, any large-scale war was a natural state of affairs, where every healthy man was considered a warrior by default. But the loss of an elite, trained unit tore a huge, gaping financial hole in the budget of the great empire. Training a new combat-ready cohort required time, which was simply not available during a grueling, protracted campaign. An experienced, disciplined veteran was worth his weight in gold, and his health was safeguarded by every administrative means available. Therefore, strict sanitation became an integral part of the legendary Roman military discipline for centuries. Commanders inspected the cleanliness of the camp just as thoroughly as they checked the sharpness of swords and the sturdiness of defensive wooden shields. The army had special qualified officers who were solely responsible for planning the layout of the future fortified camp. They arrived at the site of the upcoming encampment in advance to mark out the entire vast territory competently and with geometric precision. And the first thing they looked for carefully was the right spot for deep latrines far from water. It sounds absurd, but victory in battle often began with the right choice of a place for the toilet. Just think about this incredible level of advanced planning and total organization of the process. While foolish enemies desperately hoped for the fickle favor of the gods, the Romans relied on a sturdy shovel and clear regulations. They didn't believe in magical amulets to ward off disease. They firmly believed in a deep defensive trench. This pragmatic, systematic approach made their army remarkably resilient during long, grueling campaigns through foreign, uncharted lands. Where enemy troops were melting away before their eyes from a mysterious fever, the Romans maintained full 100% combat readiness. They simply isolated the source of the infection from healthy people with frightening, cold mathematical efficiency. In the end, the invisible enemy was defeated not by advanced medicine, but by the most ordinary army shovel. The Romans proved in practice that iron discipline saves more lives than even the best ancient physicians. It's amusing to realize that the greatest European empire was built not only on blood and plundered foreign gold. It stood firmly on a very solid foundation of properly dug field latrines. And for some reason, this remarkable historical fact is constantly ignored in grandiose historical films. Yet it is precisely here that the most important secret of Roman military invincibility lies. The system of field toilets in the Roman army was given the elegant name Fossa Sanitaria. Translated from Latin, it sounds noble, but in reality it meant an ordinary sanitary trench. However, this was not just a random hole hastily dug in the ground by tired soldiers. It was a rigorous engineering project with strictly defined dimensions and operating guidelines. Roman surveyors literally used a ruler to check the depth and width of this vital structure. If the trench did not meet the standard, those responsible were forced to redo the hard work. A standard latrine trench had to be deep enough to prevent the smell from spreading throughout the camp. Usually, soldiers dug a neat pit at least 1.5 to 2 meters deep. It sounds like grueling physical labor, and especially considering that this took place after a long march. Digging took their last ounce of strength, but no one dared to complain or shirk their duties. After all, a deep trench ensured that pesky flies could not easily reach the biological waste. And it was precisely flies that were the main carriers of that very deadly army dysentery. Modern epidemiologists fully confirm the absolute validity of such measures for field conditions. After each use, soldiers were required to cover their waste with a small layer of soil. For this purpose, piles of previously dug up soil were always kept ready next to the trench. This method, ingenious in its simplicity, instantly blocked unpleasant odors and prevented insects from gaining access. Today, we use complex caustic chemicals in portable toilets to achieve exactly the same effect. The Romans, however, made do with soil that was absolutely free and always right under their feet. They intuitively created a highly effective system for the daily disposal of biologically hazardous materials. Your office job may seem complicated, but at least you don't have to bury your waste with a shovel. The trenches were deliberately made narrow so that soldiers could stand over them or sit on wooden poles. There was not a trace of the marble seats found in the luxurious urban baths of Rome. The legionnaires' field life was generally characterized by extreme asceticism and austerity in every detail. Everything was subordinated to maximum utility, speed of construction, and incredible ease of use. For comfort, sturdy planks with slits were sometimes laid across the pit if the camp was set up for a long time. But during rapid marches, the soldiers made do with the most basic setup, balancing over a deep pit. The army's main requirement was that everything be strictly confined within the sanitary zone. When the trench was about 2/3 full, it was immediately filled with soil to the very top. Leaving the pit open at the edges was strictly and categorically prohibited by strict military regulations. This could lead to soldiers accidentally falling in during the dark, or to sewage being washed away by rain. Afterward, the soil was firmly compacted with feet to prevent any accidental surface contamination. Another layer of clean soil was added on top, or previously cut sod was laid down. And right next to it, work would immediately begin on a brand new sanitation trench following the same standards. This continuous cycle allowed the camp to remain perfectly clean even during a prolonged siege of an enemy city. In essence, the Romans practiced eco-friendly waste management long before the advent of this trendy modern term. They did not pollute the environment but preserved it, caring for the health of future generations. The areas surrounding Roman encampments did not turn into poisoned wastelands, as was the case with the barbarians. A clean camp ensured high morale among the legionaries and protected them from exhaustion. Every filled-in trench was another small step toward overall victory. Imagine the enormous amount of daily earthwork required for an army of 50,000 men. They needed dozens, if not hundreds, of such new trenches every single day. And all of this had to be done quickly, precisely, and without unnecessary chatter. This was colossal, exhausting labor, demanding incredible discipline and endurance from every legionnaire. You've marched 30 grueling kilometers in armor, and now you have to dig a deep hole. Congratulations, you've just gotten another round of strength training without even asking for it. This is exactly how the Romans maintained their soldiers' incredible physical condition during long campaigns. The legionnaires' muscles grew stronger not only from training battles, but also from constant manual labor. Physical work in the fresh air toughened their bodies and made them resilient. Hard labor kept soldiers from entertaining thoughts of mutiny or dissatisfaction with their service. A healthy and obedient spirit lived within a tired body, ready to carry out any orders. Every trench dug trained a soldier's body better than any modern gym. Another interesting detail concerns the soldier's personal hygiene under these harsh field conditions. Instead of toilet paper, the Romans used a special sponge on a stick, called by the strange word zilospongium. In the harsh conditions of the campaign, these were often simply bundles of moss, leaves, or dry hay. Sponges cost money, so ordinary legionnaires more often used whatever grew under their feet. But even these primitive personal hygiene items were strictly disposed of in the same trench. Scattering used material around the latrine pit was considered an incredibly serious military offense. Cleanliness around the pits was monitored by camp guards no less strictly than the defensive perimeter. Violators faced severe penalties, including the loss of part of their daily rations. No one wanted to miss out on tasty porridge because of their laziness or carelessness. Discipline was maintained through fear of punishment and a shared understanding of the importance of these simple rules. The soldiers kept an eye on one another, quashing any attempts to violate the established order. Cleanliness became as much a habit for them as cleaning their weapons before battle. It's amusing that modern historians love to excavate precisely these ancient Roman army latrines. For archaeologists, such sites are a veritable goldmine of valuable and rare information. These securely buried trenches preserve a vast amount of information about the lives of ordinary legionnaires. Layers of earth preserved everyday objects, protecting them from the destructive effects of oxygen. Scientists find lost coins, broken metal clasps, and even the remains of soldiers' food there. Time seems to have stood still in these deep pits, preserving the daily life of ancient warriors. Based on this waste, modern biologists can accurately determine what the army ate during a specific campaign. They study fossilized grain, remains, animal bones, and seeds of various wild plants. This allows them to reconstruct the soldiers' diet and understand what diseases they suffered from. It turns out that strict Roman sanitary discipline has inadvertently preserved invaluable historical data for us. Truly, the trash of one ancient person is a real treasure for the modern archaeologist. It is from such small details that our overall picture of the distant past is pieced together. This ironclad system functioned flawlessly across all climatic zones of the vast empire. Whether in the hot, dry sands of Egypt, the dense, damp forests of Germany, or the cold hills of Britain, Roman engineers knew how to adapt their standards to any type of local soil. In sandy soil, trenches were reinforced with woven branches, and in clay soil, drainage channels were dug. Wherever a legionary's heavy boot stepped, a perfectly neat latrine trench immediately appeared. It was an integral part of the Roman way of life that they brought to the barbarians. It became as recognizable a symbol of the Roman presence as paved roads and towering aqueducts. The cleanliness of the camp demonstrated the empire's cultural superiority over its wild and unwashed neighbors. Local tribes often watched these strange earthen rituals of the conquerors with utter bewilderment. They simply couldn't understand why anyone would waste so much effort digging pits for waste. The barbarians didn't realize that it was precisely this mundane ritual that made the Romans absolutely invincible. While they were dying of disease in their filthy encampments, the Romans remained healthy and strong. The sanitary ditch proves one very simple but incredibly important historical truth. Great technological breakthroughs do not always require complex mechanisms and extremely rare materials. Sometimes all it takes is a simple understanding of the problem and an iron will to tackle it through tedious daily routine. The Romans did not invent the microscope, but they were able to defeat an invisible enemy through organization. They took an ordinary dirty pit and turned it into a tool for tactical superiority over the enemy. Victory was forged not only on the battlefields, but also in the deep sanitary trenches. They saved millions of lives with a simple army shovel and strict regulations. The Roman war machine ran smoothly precisely because of attention to such details. And this deserves no less historical respect than their famous victories on the battlefield. We often marvel at the glint of swords and the grandeur of triumphs, forgetting the hard labor. Yet it was precisely this humble labor that built the great empire we still remember today. Our history was built by the hands of ordinary soldiers, armed with ordinary shovels. Digging the right deep trench was only half the battle for the organized Roman army. The most important thing was exactly where this delicate engineering structure would be located. If a latrine was placed in the wrong spot, all the incredible effort that went into building it would instantly lose its meaning. Roman engineers had strict regulations defining the exact distance from other areas of the vast camp. These rules were passed down from generation to generation and were absolutely non-negotiable. A mistake in planning cost thousands of lives, so there was no room here for creative experiments by officers. The first and most important inviolable rule: drinking water must be absolutely safe. The sanitary ditch was always dug strictly downstream from the source of the army's drinking water. Even if the river was far away, engineers carefully took into account the slope of the terrain and the direction of the groundwater. Contaminating the drinking water was the surest and quickest way to destroy one's own legion. Modern building codes require the same when designing comfortable country homes. But the ancient Romans had already figured this out a couple of millennia before the first health inspections appeared. The second important rule concerned the location of field kitchens and storage areas for valuable food supplies. Toilets were always situated at the greatest possible safe distance from the areas where soldiers' food was prepared. The Romans had long observed that the proximity of food and waste inevitably led to outbreaks of stomach ailments. They knew nothing about the fact that insidious flies carry microscopic bacteria on their legs. But their years of empirical observation had worked flawlessly, suggesting a perfectly sound tactical solution to the problem. It sounds like common sense, but for some reason, many medieval armies completely ignored it. The third decisive factor that Roman planners always took into account was the local wind direction. Latrines were always located downwind from the living tents of the weary soldiers. No one wanted a light evening breeze to carry incredibly foul odors into the clean camp. This was a matter not only of preventive hygiene, but also of the Roman legionaries' basic morale. A well-rested soldier who breathes freely in the fresh air fights far better than a sleep-deprived comrade. Roman commanders understood perfectly well that the army's basic comfort directly affects its lethality. Most often, these latrines were located on the very edge of the camp, between the tents and the defensive rampart. This open space was called the inner vallum, and it was simply ideal for such delicate needs. Soldiers didn't have to walk far in the dead of night, yet the latrines remained on the safe periphery. In addition, the pungent odor deterred wild animals that might roam around the camp in complete darkness. The result was a kind of invisible biological defense line, functioning flawlessly in passive mode. The genius of Roman military planning lay precisely in such stunningly multifunctional solutions. Just imagine the level of responsibility borne by the officers who marked out these camp zones. They had to quickly assess the complex terrain, find water, determine the wind direction, and set priorities. And all of this was done literally on the fly, while the main army was still on a grueling march. They had no modern navigators, detailed satellite images, or sophisticated meteorological instruments. Instead, they had vast practical experience and a precise geometric algorithm for constructing the ideal camp. This system worked like a perfect Swiss watch mechanism, functioning flawlessly for decades. If a military camp remained in one place for a long time, sanitary regulations became even stricter. Trenches were dug even further beyond the main defensive wooden fortifications of the Roman legion. Special guarded passages were cut through for the soldiers so they could safely exit beyond the high rampart. Additional armed guards were stationed near these areas to prevent enemies from catching the soldiers off guard. Going to the bathroom during a long siege could be a rather risky and frightening undertaking, but the clever Romans preferred to risk an encounter with an enemy scout rather than face the invisible threat of cholera. Compare this to civilized European cities 1,000 years after the fall of the Great Rome. In the enlightened Middle Ages, people simply poured full chamber pots out of windows directly onto narrow streets. They calmly drank water from rivers into which they themselves dumped trash and all the city's sewage daily. It's no surprise that the dreaded plague and cholera wiped out half the population of these incredibly foul-smelling cities. Medieval kings lived in conditions that a common Roman soldier would have found utterly unbearable. Progress doesn't always follow a straight path, and sometimes humanity foolishly forgets its most vital knowledge. That is why the Roman system of latrine placement seems like a true glimpse into the distant future. They thought in terms of large-scale prevention and quarantine, ahead of their time by hundreds of long years. Every trench dug according to strict rules saved dozens of lives in the distant long term. In modern corporate business culture, this would proudly be called ideal risk management. The Romans simply and modestly called it competent leadership of an army under the harsh conditions of wartime. And the striking results of this approach still inspire genuine admiration among military historians. Order always beats class, and iron discipline beats a disorganized mob in absolutely any situation. The Roman Empire proved this by standardizing even the basest and dirtiest of human needs. They transformed the dangerous chaos of life on the march into a predictable, incredibly clean and safe military routine. The exact location of the latrine became as important a symbol of their civilization as the majestic stone amphitheaters. And perhaps it was this modest domestic achievement that was their most significant contribution to military affairs. Because without it, the proud Roman legions would never have been able to conquer half the known world. Imagine a typical day in the life of an ordinary Roman legionary during an active and prolonged military campaign. You wake up at the first light of dawn, quickly fold up your tent, and gather your 80-pound pack. Then you march about 30 kilometers under the scorching summer sun or in cold, pouring rain. Your body begs for rest, and your aching legs turn into a single throbbing mass of nagging pain. But when the column finally stops, your hard day's work only enters a new phase. No one sits down to rest blissfully because the large-scale construction of a fortified camp begins immediately. Building the camp involved a vast array of tasks evenly distributed among all the soldiers. One group chopped wood for sharp stakes, another dug a deep defensive trench around the entire perimeter. And of course, a separate team immediately set to work creating those very latrines. This was not a humiliating punishment for those who had committed offenses. It was a routine rotational duty for every soldier. Today you stand night watch, tomorrow you grind grain, and the day after tomorrow you dig deep latrines. Such a fair system did not allow soldiers to slack off and maintained absolute brotherly equality in labor. The speed with which the Romans erected their fortifications and sanitary zones was truly mind-boggling. Enemy scouts often watched with mystical horror as an empty plain turned into a city in a matter of hours. 50,000 men worked in incredible unison, like ants in a perfectly organized forest anthill. No one fidgeted aimlessly. No one asked unnecessary or foolish questions of the strict army commanders. Every soldier knew his place, his task, and the exact standards for performing the assigned work. This is a stunning example of how mass, systematic training trumps any brilliant individual initiative. But why was discipline regarding basic sanitation so fanatical and absolutely unyielding? Because soldiers are young, lazy guys who are always subconsciously looking for the easiest way out. If you don't keep a close eye on them, they're bound to start breaking the rules for their own momentary convenience. At night, when it is dark and cold, the temptation not to walk far to the latrine is incredibly strong. The centurions were well aware of this typical human weakness and suppressed it with the most brutal methods known. The stick and carrot approach worked flawlessly, forcing exhausted soldiers to maintain hygiene out of fear of inevitable punishment. The camp's military police, if one can even call it that by modern standards, patrolled the streets around the clock. Anyone caught by chance relieving themselves in an unauthorized place was immediately and brutally beaten. Sometimes for gross and repeated violations, a soldier could even be transferred in disgrace to a unit of lower status. It sounds incredibly barbaric to a modern, civilized person accustomed to personal rights and freedoms, but in the harsh conditions of ancient warfare, democracy and tolerance would have meant rapid mass death from infection. Paradoxically, the commander's cruelty saved thousands of their subordinates' lives in the long run. And here it gets even more interesting. This monotonous routine forged a truly unbreakable winner's mentality, a soldier capable of forcing himself to dig a trench after an exhausting march will never break in battle. The Romans trained not only their leg muscles, they trained a unique ability to overcome mental exhaustion. Modern sports psychologists call this the development of willpower through monotonous and grueling overexertion. Roman generals had never read anything about psychology, but they clearly saw the results on the battlefield. Their soldiers maintained an icy composure where savage barbarians panicked and fled in cowardice. Every morning began with the old sanitary trenches being thoroughly inspected and tightly filled with earth. The camp was always left so clean that it could not be easily exploited by enemies following in their tracks. Filling in dirty pits was also part of the strict regulations and was a mandatory ritual before the start of a new march. No dangerous traces of waste, only perfectly level ground and discarded wooden stakes. It was a peculiar ecological footprint that the massive Roman army left behind on foreign soil. Commanders took cleanliness to the point of absolute military absurdity. But it was precisely this absurdity that made them great. This whole endless system seems incredibly exhausting and tedious, and it truly was. Legionnaires often bitterly complained in letters home about the hard physical labor and overly harsh commanders. They sincerely hated digging those endless pits just as much as you hate morning city traffic jams. But it was precisely this hated, dirty routine that allowed them to return home alive with a very rich haul. Survival in war is far from always just about beautiful heroic feats with a shining sword in hand. More often than not, mere survival is incredibly boring, hard, and dirty routine work every single day. Imagine the huge difference in the physical condition of the two armies before the decisive, bloody battle. The barbarians had been living in damp mud for several weeks, suffering terribly from parasites and horrific intestinal infections. Their strength was completely sapped by disease, and their fighting spirit was undermined by constant and unbearable physical discomfort. The Romans, on the other hand, slept peacefully in a secure camp, drank clean water, and were in perfect physical health. The outcome of such a clash was practically a foregone conclusion, even before the massive armies clashed in a fierce melee. The Roman victory was forged not only in the armories, it was steadfastly forged in the sanitary quarters of the army camp. The Romans' marching sanitation routine deservedly became the standard for many generations of future military theorists. It convincingly proved that proper logistics in daily life are far more important than blind bravery and numerical superiority. Spontaneous heroism may accidentally win a single day, but tedious daily discipline wins 10-year wars. Roman latrine trenches stand as a unique testament to human organization, successfully overcoming the wild chaos of nature. They taught the world once and for all that the true strength of an army lies in its ability to maintain perfect order. And this valuable lesson remains as relevant as ever, even 2,000 years after the empire's collapse. It is amusing to realize how surprisingly ancient practical knowledge sometimes returns to our modern world. After the final fall of Rome, enlightened Europe plunged for a long time into centuries of appalling unsanitary conditions and ignorance. The secrets of the ancient legion's ideal field hygiene were securely buried under the thick dust of historical archives. Napoleon's vast armies and the participants in the Crimean War perished en masse, and ingloriously from those very same ancient diseases. 19th century generals discovered to their utter astonishment that common typhus and dysentery were decimating their elite regiments. It seemed that civilized humanity had completely forgotten the brilliant logistical lessons of its distant ancient ancestors. But everything changed radically at the beginning of the 20th century, when war became truly industrial and global. The U.S. Army, actively preparing for large-scale conflicts, began to seriously study the historical experience of military logistics. U.S. military medics turned to ancient texts, seeking reliable solutions for massive field camps. And what they suddenly found there struck them with its incredibly pragmatic and brutal modernity. Roman regulations from 2,000 years ago turned out to be the perfect survival guide for modern infantry. It turned out that humanity had never been able to come up with anything better than a deep trench and an ordinary shovel. During World War I and World War II, the U.S. Army implemented strict protocols for the construction of field latrines, and they were practically an exact detailed copy of that very ancient Roman Fossa Sanitaria. U.S. instructions also prescribed the depth of the trench and the rules for its daily, thorough backfilling with incredible precision. The requirements regarding distance from water sources and field kitchens fully and precisely matched Roman standards. This was not some simple coincidence. It was a direct, conscious borrowing of a proven historical model. Roman military engineers could have been genuinely proud of how their clever ideas were brought to life in the 20th century. American sergeants hounded young recruits for hygiene violations just as harshly as ancient Roman centurions. Soldiers were constantly forced to dig deep foxholes and latrines after long, exhausting forced marches. And the young men from Texas or Ohio genuinely hated this dirty work just as much. They complained loudly about bloody blisters, sore backs, and the pointlessness of endlessly digging hard earth. But the harsh survival statistics convincingly showed that this strict old system worked absolutely flawlessly. Combat casualties from epidemic outbreaks in American field camps were quickly reduced to historic lows. Modern military doctors have fully and unconditionally confirmed the wisdom of those harsh ancient commanders. The method of daily isolating human waste under a layer of soil effectively interrupts the life cycle of dangerous insects. This is very basic biology, which the ancient Romans brilliantly understood solely through a process of bloody trial and error. Today, smart scientists write complex doctoral dissertations on this topic using electron microscopes and complex statistics. But the ancient legionnaire simply grabbed a shovel because otherwise he would have been brutally beaten with a heavy wooden club. Different historical approaches to motivation led to the same incredibly brilliant, life-saving result. It is very interesting to compare the basic equipment of a modern soldier with that of a fighter in the ancient Roman legion. Today, a modern infantryman has a lightweight Kevlar helmet, a digital radio, and a rifle with a precision optical sight. A Roman had a heavy bronze helmet, a large leather shield, and a short iron sword. But both types of soldiers are required to carry a simple, small infantry shovel for digging. Weapons are constantly changing, technology is advancing rapidly, but basic human physiology remains completely unchanged. And as long as people remain biological beings, they will inevitably have to dig proper, deep trenches in war. Even in our modern age of smart drones and satellite communications, field hygiene remains a critical factor. When a modern mechanized battalion moves into the wilderness, it employs that very same Roman deployment tactic. Officers carefully check the wind direction, safe sources of drinking water, and reliable supply routes. If the basic life support system fails, even the most advanced and expensive weapons turn into utterly useless scrap metal. Because a sick, exhausted soldier cannot operate a complex drone or fire a sniper rifle with precision. And in this fundamental sense, military logistics has not changed one bit since the glorious days of Julius Caesar. This makes one seriously wonder how much more incredibly useful, forgotten knowledge is hidden in world history. We've grown accustomed to looking down on ancient people with arrogance, considering them naive, primitive, and very uneducated. We take pride in our powerful smartphones and spaceships, often forgetting the most basic things. But the Roman sanitation system shows that a sharp analytical mind and iron discipline can work true miracles. They effectively solve problems on the scale of modern megacities using wood, ordinary stone, and plain earth. And their ingenious solutions are still successfully standing the test of time under the harshest field conditions. The legacy of the Great Rome is not just beautiful, cold marble statues in quiet modern museums. It is not just the familiar Latin alphabet that we use quite routinely every single day. Their true greatest legacy is a brilliant, systematic approach to solving the most complex everyday and organizational tasks. The ability to break down a huge, daunting problem into small, understandable steps and get absolutely everyone to carry them out. The U.S. Army understood this perfectly and applied it with tremendous success in its global military operations. A good working idea has absolutely no expiration date, even if it doesn't smell very pleasant. Ultimately, the entire complex history of human warfare is a history of the struggle against our own biological nature. Those ancient armies that learned to strictly control their basic needs became great, invincible empires. The Romans were the first to convincingly prove that proper military hygiene is just as important as brilliant military genius. They transformed filth and biological chaos into a reliable tool for survival and total military domination. And every modern field service manual carries within it the stark shadow of the Roman legionary. That very same, utterly exhausted guy with a shovel who laid the solid foundation for modern military sanitation. That is how a completely ordinary, base human biological need radically changed the course of world military history. The next time you see the gleaming, shining armor of the Romans in an epic movie, remember this dirty work. Behind each of their great historical victories stood not only sharp iron swords, but also thousands of dugout trenches. The Roman Empire conquered the ancient world not only because it was significantly braver than all other peoples. It won, first and foremost, because its soldiers remained healthy while everyone else was dying agonizingly from disease. And this is, perhaps, the most important, the most pragmatic, and the least glamorous secret of their legendary thousand-year success.